Good evening. Thanks for joining us on India Business Hour. I'm Shireen Bhan. The headlines that we are tracking: Infosys largely missed estimates in second quarter, raises the full-year guidance for revenue, even as it lowers the upper end of its margin guidance. Also clears a 9,300 crore rupee buyback. India's top IT companies see average revenue growth of 4% in Q2. Infosys is the top performer on margin expansion. HCL Tech is the only company to maintain the pace of hiring. Wipro reports muted growth guidance and a big drop in hiring new recruits. Stocks stumble at the opening bell on Wall Street after US inflation data spooks investors. The consumer price index accelerates in September compared to August, signaling that the Federal Reserve is likely to continue with aggressive rate hikes. For the first time, Singapore Airlines announces that it is in talks with the Tata Group over a potential integration of Vistara with Air India. Also adds that discussions are ongoing and no definitive terms have been agreed upon yet. 11 airports are next in the line for privatization, and a cabinet note will be sent soon. Sources in the aviation ministry say the government will not reintroduce the airfare cap or interfere with market dynamics. Go Air has also applied for the Emergency Credit Guarantee Scheme along with SpiceJet. Negotiations between India and the UK over a potential trade deal could extend beyond October, even as both nations were hoping to finalise an agreement by Diwali. The UK Trade Department tells CNBC-TV18 it won't sacrifice quality for speed and will only sign a deal when the interests of both nations are met. Indian startup funding hits a two-year low in the September quarter amidst the global slowdown, according to a PwC report. But early-stage funding remains upbeat, accounts for 21% of the total funding, as venture capital firms continue to back the Indian startup ecosystem. The Supreme Court delivers a split verdict in the Karnataka hijab ban case. One judge upholds the ban, the other calls wearing hijab a matter of choice. The Chief Justice of India is likely to refer the matter to a larger bench. The hijab ban is likely to continue in the interim. Rajasthan's tourism industry is hoping for a revival after the COVID-19 body blow. Hopes are pinned on the festive season to boost growth. A special report coming up. Well, let's start with the big global story. The big data point moving stock markets across the world. Inflation in the US remains red hot, and that is spooking investors on Wall Street and elsewhere. Inflation for the month of September has accelerated by 8.2%. This was in line with estimates when you compare it year on year. But on a month-on-month basis, prices have accelerated 0.4% compared to estimates of 0.3%. Core inflation remains sticky at 6.6%. All of this signals that the Fed is going to have to continue with aggressive rate hikes. Steve Leisman is here with more on the inflation data and what the Fed is likely to do next. Steve.
There is just nothing in here to tell you that there's reason for the Fed to pivot. And I can tell you right now that one number here that is maybe the most significant. I've not seen this number before. Rick will either back me up or shoot me down. 483 on the peak funds rate, April 2023. I'm just making sure that's the high water mark. Yes, it is. April 2023, we were at 468 going into this 469. We've not seen a new funds rate now. 483, and again, nothing in here. Everything the Fed, look, they have been medium term to long term wrong. Yeah. Short term, they've been right when they've been coming forward. And you had Mester, who took a little heat the other day, saying you can't even say inflation has peaked yet. Well, you can't even say inflation has peaked yet, at least in these numbers. We can argue about whether or not the Fed's watching the right numbers or not, but you look at the panoply of service sector numbers in here, and you see them rising. There has been a little bit of relief on the good side.
Steve Leisman there reporting no reason for the Fed to pivot away from what it is currently doing. Aggressive rate hikes likely to continue. Now to the action on the Lal Street, where the stock markets wobbled in trade, finally closing in the red. The Sensex lost nearly 400 points, the Nifty lost 100. Financial stocks led the decline, with the Nifty Bank Index losing over 1%. Mid-caps also falling in tandem with the blue chips. And of course, as we point out, the global markets are weak at this point in time, and that will weigh on sentiment when we open for trade tomorrow. In the money market, the rupee remains range-bound against the dollar. One US dollar continues to cost more than 82 rupees, but the rupee's been stuck in that tight range for the last few days, with reports of RBI intervention earlier this week. Crude oil prices remain volatile, with Brent crude trading above $90 a barrel. The International Energy Agency has raised the red flag on the recent output cut announced by OPEC Plus nations. The IEA has said the cut in oil production could result in a global recession. But the big earnings of the day, Infosys reporting second quarter numbers largely in line with estimates. Margin expansion was above estimates, but revenue growth missed expectations by just a bit. For the full year, Infosys has raised the upper end of its revenue outlook from 22% to 23%. However, the upper end of the margin guidance has been lowered from 23% to 22%. Ritu Singh spoke with Infosys' CEO Salil Parekh on the earnings report and his outlook for growth.
We are seeing growth in both digital, over 30%, and growth in our core services. So we have now really two engines, both of which are growing for different reasons. Now we are seeing parts of high tech and parts of telecom where some of the discretionary spend are coming down. However, we are also seeing our large deals value for Q2 at 2.7 billion.
But is that sustainable, the 2.7 billion kind of a run rate?
So there we are seeing a pipeline for large deals extremely large. Now why is that? Because the earlier point, which is both digital and cost, are both in our playbook.
Are you expecting higher furloughs in the third quarter, as usually is the case?
So as you said, in the third quarter there's typically furloughs. We don't see any indication of a change in terms from the past years of what the quantum will be. But there are always furloughs, so that seasonality comes in.
Well, that's Infosys' Salil Parekh. So how have the IT big boys fared this quarter? Rima joins us now with the IT report card. Remember, all four now have reported their numbers.
Well, in terms of the numbers, it's pretty much revenue growth has been similar across all the large cap IT companies, so approximately 4%. And there was no big revenue positive surprise across all the four companies. The big positive surprise has come in on margins, where TCS, Infosys and HCLTech's margins. So 3 out of 4 of the large IT companies have positively surprised on the margins, and margins have expanded quite considerably by 100 to 150 basis points for these 3 companies. Only in the case of Wipro, margins were largely steady, flat on a quarter-on-quarter basis. The guidance both by HCLTech and Infosys has been tightened. So Infi today said that constant currency revenue growth will now be at 15 to 16% versus 14 to 16% earlier. But HCLTech, there was a revenue guidance upgrade. They're now expecting 13.5 to 14.5% revenue growth versus 12 to 14% earlier. So HCLTech was a full guidance upgrade, but in the case of Infosys, it was tightening, but all in all positive because the lower end was raised. Wipro's Q3 guidance, not full year, Q3 guidance was muted, very modest, and the street was disappointed. In terms of the hiring numbers, TCS and Wipro's hiring numbers are significantly lower than what they've done in the past. Only in the case of HCLTech, as the chart will tell you, the hiring numbers are pretty similar to the past, which is why the street gave a big thumbs up to HCLTech's numbers, because it was an all-round beat. Deal wins. The one which tops the chart here is clearly Infosys. Look at the way the deal wins have picked up on a quarter-on-quarter basis. 60% higher, $2.7 billion is the deal wins, new deal wins from Infosys this time. So that's the standout number. The miss over here was again from Wipro, where the deal wins actually declined on a quarter-on-quarter basis. So in a nutshell, it's a pretty good showing. Revenues in line with expectations, largely a margin beat. The companies sound more optimistic than what the market was fearing on demand. Hiring is slightly on the lower side compared to the track record of the last couple of quarters. And on deal wins, it's a bit of a mixed performance.
So a good second quarter for the top tech companies in India. Rima, many thanks for joining us. Staying with tech, Infosys CEO Salil Parekh also spoke about the ongoing debate on moonlighting. He said the company is fine as long as employees seek gig work with the prior permission of their managers. However, Infosys does not support full-time dual employment. Take a look.
For external gig work, we have got an approach where with the prior permission of our manager, keeping in mind confidentiality and contractual, the employees are allowed to do that. that we are also making the policies more comprehensive on that, so it's very simple for our employees to see it. However, to be very clear, we are not supporting dual full-time employment.
Well, let's move now from IT to aviation. Singapore Airlines says that it is in talks with the Tata Group for a potential integration of Vistara and Air India. However, the discussions are ongoing and no definitive terms have been agreed upon yet. Madiha joins us now with the details. Madiha, this is of course something that the Tata Group would like to take forward. That has been the clear plan from the very start after the takeover of Air India, and now Singapore Airlines confirming that talks are on.
Well, this is the first time that Singapore Airlines has announced it is in talks with the Tata Group for a potential integration of Vistara with Air India. This may not necessarily be a merger, but a definite attempt at building synergies and piggybacking on the systems and core capabilities of both operations. However, it has agreed the discussions are ongoing and no definitive terms have been agreed upon yet. Remember, Singapore Airlines holds a 49% stake in Vistara, while the remaining 51% is held by the Tata Group. This development is not completely surprising. The Tatas have in the past indicated that they hope to bring synergies between their various airline brands. There have also been reports that the group has been evaluating options to consolidate its airline business, and this could be the first step in that larger strategy. Experts I have spoken to say that from a market share perspective, such a move makes sense. As of August, Vistara's market share stood at 9.7%, while Air India enjoyed an 8.5% share. If the two entities were to come together, even if it's just in some areas, the market share would go up substantially. A full combination would mathematically take the market share to 18.2%. This will be a big boost for Air India, which wants to enjoy at least a 30% share of the domestic market in the next 5 years.
Madiha, many thanks. So a potential integration merger in the making at this point in time. Talks are on, says Singapore Airlines, with Tata Group for Air India and Vistara to come together. Staying with aviation, 11 airports are next in line for privatization. Sources tell us that a cabinet note on the same will be sent soon. That's not all. We also learned that both Go Air and SpiceJet have applied for collateral-free loans under the Emergency Credit Guarantee Scheme. Abhimanyu joins us now with the aviation wrap. Abhi.
Government sources have indicated that SpiceJet and Go Air have sought funds under the modified ECLGS scheme. Bank of Baroda and Axis Bank are slated to start dispersing funds to airlines in 4 to 6 weeks. A cabinet note is also expected to be sent soon to approve privatization of next bundle of 11 airports. With the festive season raising airfares, the government is expecting the uptick to improve the financial health of airlines and has no plans to reintroduce price caps on airfares or interfere with market dynamics. The government is yet to take a call on the demand of the Aviation Ministry seeking inclusion of ATF in GST. Sources said that ATF prices are down since the 1st of October, of which a 3% fall is due to a lower crude price and another 3% is due to negotiations. However, the 6% benefit in ATF prices has been undone by 10% devaluation of the rupee. Coming to SpiceJet, the aviation regulator will decide on extension of the 50% cap of SpiceJet's operations. However, government sources clarified that the 50% cap had not affected even a single flight of SpiceJet as lesser aircrafts were being deployed, and the government is ready to consider the airline's request to deploy more aircrafts as it does not want to constrain air capacity. The union government had also conducted discussions on use of 1% or 2% sustainable fuel in aircrafts, over which IOCL is already working on 2 pilot projects in Gujarat and Panipat. However, the availability of sustainable fuel for aircrafts continues to remain an issue.
Abhimanyu, many thanks for joining us. Now, the much-awaited free trade agreement between India and the UK is unlikely to be completed before Diwali, which had been the target set in April this year. It now seems that the final deal could get delayed due to unresolved issues and divisions within the Liz Truss cabinet. Also, the recent comments by UK's Home Secretary on Indian migrants have added to the difficulties. Despite the recent development, both sides are hoping to conclude the deal as soon as possible. Parikshit joins us now with more. Parikshit, where is this headed?
When asked whether the Diwali timeline for the FTA would be met, the UK Department of International Trade was non-committal. The spokesperson told CNBC-TV18 that while the UK was interested in a high-ambition free trade agreement, They remain clear that they won't sacrifice quality for speed, and they will only sign a deal that meets the interests of both countries. The recent comments made by the UK Home Secretary have not gone down well with Indian officials as well. Suella Braverman had said that the Indian migrants are the largest people who overstay in the UK. The Indian High Commission had rebutted her claims and made it clear that India supports legal migration, and it is actually the UK which still needs to show demonstrable progress in honouring commitments under the Migration and Mobility Partnership. Among the pending issues between the two countries are mobility of professionals, data localization, tariffs on Scotch whisky, and access for legal services. However, the Indian government is quite confident. Sources tell us that talks are at an advanced stage and there is consensus on most goods and services, and the ball is actually now in the UK Prime Minister's court. The Indian government also believes that there is infighting in the UK cabinet and there are economic challenges facing the economy there which are slowing down the negotiations. Now, what the UK Home Secretary said is in no way linked to the FTA talks. This is what officials here in India say. India has only asked for greater mobility of professionals on short-term visas to deliver services, so it is possible that the deal may miss the Diwali goal that had been set by Boris Johnson and Narendra Modi in April this year, but the intent on both sides is and remains to conclude it very soon.
Parikshit Luthra, many thanks for joining us. Meanwhile, UK Home Secretary Suella Braverman may have switched her position and is now in support of the FTA. Sanjay Suri gets us the latest from London. Sanjay.
We have some very firm indications now that British Home Secretary Suella Braverman is now distancing herself from some of her earlier observations against the free trade agreement being negotiated between India and Britain, and that she is now fully supportive of it. This is after her earlier comments appeared to throw the negotiations into some sort of disarray. She has now emphasized to Lord Rami Ranger, a senior Conservative Party leader and a member of the House of Lords, that she is backing the FTA fully.
She categorically assured me that she is fully behind the UK-India free trade agreement, which will be the mother of all free trade agreement between the 5th or the 6th world economies.
Government has taken a position that overrides her earlier comments. It has said very firmly that it wants the FTA to go ahead. This, of course, would be the big prize for Liz Truss.
Sanjay Suri, many thanks for joining us. It is time for us to take stock of all the action from the startup world. Arundhati Ramanan is here with the Startup Snapshot this evening. Aru.
Thanks so much for that, Shireen. Here's everything you need to know from the startup world. India's funding winter only gets colder. Indian startup funding has hit a two-year low in the September quarter amidst the global slowdown, this according to a PwC report. Now, this quarter saw 205 deals worth $2.7 billion. The decline was seen across all stages of investment. However, the decline was the least in early stage funding, which accounted for 21% of the total funding. Now, after Byju's announced that it would lay off 2,500 employees, EdTech company Front Row laid off 125 to 130 employees, which accounted for 75% of its staff. The layoffs were mainly across their sales and marketing teams. This marked the second round of layoffs at the company in the last 5 months. Meanwhile, online edtech unicorn PhysicsWallah has acquired Prep Online, an online learning platform for national eligibility cum entrance test, and Altus Vortex, a publisher of exam preparation books. The acquisitions have come at a time when PhysicsWallah is eyeing new acqui-hires this year as it looks to expand geographically, strengthen its leadership team, and foray into newer test preparation categories. Finally, Shadowfax, a crowdsourced third-party logistics firm, has partnered with ShipRocket to facilitate same-day and next-day deliveries for D2C brands like Boat, Mamaearth, and MyGlam. The service will be enabled in the top 20 cities in India by the end of this year. With that, it is back to you.
Aru, many thanks for joining us. That is the Startup Snapshot this evening. Time for us to head into a break, but when we return, Rajasthan's tourism industry is hoping for a revival, hopes being pinned on the festive season. That and more when we return. Well, the big national story, a two-judge bench of the Supreme Court delivered a split verdict on the Karnataka government's order banning hijab in educational institutions. One judge upheld the ban, while the other called wearing hijab a matter of choice. The ball is now in the court of the Chief Justice of India, who's likely to refer the matter to a larger bench. In the interim, the ban on the hijab is likely to stay. Ashmit Kumar is here with the highlights of the court's order and its implications. Ashmit.
It was a little more than 8 months back that the schools and colleges in Karnataka made the national and international headlines, the reason being trying to enforce a ban on hijab. Now, after polarizing debates, fierce politicking and several hours of judiciary's time, we are no closer to an answer. Let's in fact trace the movements of this debate. On February 5th, the Karnataka government passed an order to ensure a more homogeneous environment. The order barred all clothing articles that disturb equality, integrity and public order. The language may have been innocent, but the intent was clearly to take aim at the hijab. Now, the government order sparked protests both for and against the ban. The issue was then taken up before the Karnataka High Court. The High Court affirmed the government ban on hijab and held that this is not an essential practice in Islam and need not be given any special consideration. Now, the issue then travelled to the Supreme Court. Muslim girls claimed before the top court of the country that their right to education and their right to freely practice their religion was being affected. The Supreme Court heard the case, marathon hearings across 10 days, and reserved its judgment on September 22nd. It was this judgment that was pronounced earlier today. Now here, important to bear in mind that the judgment was to be pronounced by a bench of two judges. That's Justice Hemant Gupta as well as Justice Sudhanshu Dhulia. Now, keeping this in mind, the Supreme Court has now given a split verdict. Both the judges have given a different view on the status of the hijab ban. While Justice Gupta has upheld the ban, Justice Dhulia has quashed the Karnataka government order. Now, Justice Hemant Gupta held in his judgment that, in his view, the plea by Muslim students deserves to be dismissed. He clarified in the judgment that the petitioners had failed to demonstrate how wearing a hijab was an essential practice in Islam. Moreover, he held that there was no violation of any fundamental rights. However, in stark opposition, Justice Dhulia held that the Karnataka government order as well as the Karnataka High Court order upholding the hijab ban both deserve to be quashed. He held that wearing hijab need not be an essential practice, but that it was supported by the right to life under Article 19 and the right to practice religion under Article 25. He cautioned that this was an issue of students' consent and that this was the foremost thing, and the foremost concern on the court's mind was education of students. In fact, he also noted that many students, especially in rural areas, have to attend to chores at home and travel long distances to schools, and that the effort of the court should be to make this process easier. So what happens now? Well, due to the split verdict, the issue has now been put before the Chief Justice of India, who's likely to assign the case to a larger bench, likely to have at least 3 judges to avoid this tie. As for the interim, lawyers that we spoke to tell us that until a clear order is passed staying the High Court order, the ban on wearing hijab will continue to be in effect. Meanwhile, given the stakes involved, that's an entire academic year for students, the petitioners are likely to move the CJI to constitute a new bench at the earliest.
Ashmit, many thanks for joining us. And before we wrap, Rajasthan's royal forts, palaces and silver sand dunes used to attract over 500 lakh tourists every year. The lockdown brought this thriving industry to a screeching halt, but things are now starting to look up. Santiago reports that the desert state is hoping these green shoots will grow into a lush oasis once again.
Rajasthan has always been a big tourist destination. From Pink City Jaipur to Blue City Jodhpur to Golden City Jaisalmer, the state's rich heritage and colourful cultural attractions brought in over 500 lakh tourists every year, and tourism accounted for about 15% of the state's $150 billion economy. But the lockdown changed everything. These forts and palaces, which were a major tourist attraction, had to be shuttered. And as a result, the sector, which was the state's third largest employment generator, ran out of gas. For Hemraj Malhotra, who has been working as a licensed guide at Jaipur's Amer Fort for over 6 years, the 2-year lockdown was a nightmare, one that didn't end when the lockdown was lifted.
देखो गुजारा तो देखो पहले तो जो थोड़ा बहुत बचा कुचा था उससे काम चला है, फिर बाद में इधर उधर से करके काम चला है क्योंकि टूरिस्ट बिल्कुल नहीं था। उसके बाद जब थोड़ा थोड़ा लॉकडाउन हटा तो मार्केट में आए तो कोई नहीं आता था। शुरुआती 1 साल में तो यह बहुत कम टूरिस्ट होता था, इक्का दुक्का आसपास का देखने को मिलता था या लोकल कोई जयपुर के होते थे, तो उन्हीं से ज़बरदस्ती करके हाथ पाँव जोड़ के दिखाना पड़ता था।
Allied industries and businesses also suffered.
लॉकडाउन हटा तो उसके कुछ महीनों तक तो टूरिस्ट बिल्कुल ही आया ही नहीं, और अब धीरे धीरे लोग आ रहे हैं। ऐसा लग रहा है कि इस सीज़न में जो है बहुत ही अच्छा काम चलेगा और फिर से हमारा सबका बिजनेस बहुत ही अच्छा ग्रोथ करेगा।
At Nahargarh Fort, which lies 11 kilometers away, the story is much the same. The lockdown may have been lifted, but the pickup in tourism activity is still sluggish. And it's domestic tourists who are making up the bulk of the visitors.
जैसे लॉकडाउन खुला है उसके बाद में टूरिस्ट पॉइंट पे टूरिस्ट नज़र आया, तो एक समय ऐसा था कि टूरिस्ट बिल्कुल देखने को नज़र ही नहीं आता था।
2020 में तो सिर्फ इंडियनों के अलावा और कुछ आती ही नहीं थी। 2021 में इंडियन ही आते थे, अब फॉरेनर आना अब शुरू हुआ है 2022 में, तो बहुत ही ज़्यादा जनसंख्या कम आने लग गई, पहले से तो बहुत ज़्यादा कम है।
The pickup since this year's tourist season began in July-August has given these people hope. Experts say 2022 is now on track to bring some much-needed relief to the sector and the state, especially if the peak season of October to March sees an upswing in arrivals.
थोड़ा सीजन अब चल रहा है, जैसे धीरे-धीरे जैसे सर्दी आएगी लोग इतना ही ज़्यादा आएंगे, और ये जैसे कोरोना चला गया उसको देखते साथ भी पब्लिक निकलने लगी है।
And that's music to many ears. The tourist season has begun. October to March is the best time to visit Rajasthan. This year's tourist season will determine whether the state has recovered from the lull caused by the pandemic. The government is confident that the state's tourism will bounce back to pre-COVID levels. People associated with the sector also claim that they have used the lockdown time for renovation and maintenance so that once things open up, they can attract more tourists than ever. In Jaipur, Rajasthan, with camera person Milind Wagmare, this is Santhya for CNBC-TV18.
Well, that's it then on this edition of India Business Hour. Thanks very much for watching. Stay tuned. The news continues here on CNBC-TV18.